Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar, focusing in on how you can think innovatively about employee listening within the higher education sector. My name is Sally Winston, and I am one of the XM strategy leaders within the Qualtrics organisation. So I lead a team of subject experts across both employee experience and customer experience across the global markets that we operate in. I've been working in the space of employee experience for around 20 years. Previous to working at Qualtrics, I was actually the lead EX practitioner at ORC International, where I ran a team of people who did a lot of work in this space. So lots and lots of experience working within this sector. I'm joined today by my wonderful colleagues, Peter Wild and Therese Morley. Peter is the Director and Head of Employee Experience at FeedbackWorks. FeedbackWorks are a key partner of Qualtrics. They've run around 100 projects for us just in the last year alone. And they deliver really fantastic, pragmatic, tailor-made support on employee experience programs. So he's going to bring absolutely tons of experience and I think really practical tips to this conversation. Peter's got over 25 years experience in designing and delivering EX programs as well. And he's worked in a variety of settings. He works at Ipsos Mori, and he was the head of employee engagement at Unilever. So some really, really interesting experience to share with you on this webinar today. And Therese Morley is our fantastic lead solution engineer within the NGO and higher education sector. She works with a range of different customers within the Qualtrics organisations to really help them think about their employee experience programs, and she's going to be bringing some of the technology that we have in this space to life. So we're hoping that this webinar is going to be about 30 to 45 minutes long, and we're going to leave time for questions at the end, but please do add any questions that you have in the chat within the webinar, and we'll collate them and answer them at the end, or if we don't have time for all of them, we'll come back to you afterwards. We will be recording this webinar and we'll be sending it out to you individually after the session. So for those of you who don't know Qualtrics, we are the leading provider of employee experience technology and more broadly XM technology in the world. We are regularly voted as the top technology within this space by analysts across the globe, and we've got extensive background in working within the education sector. Many of you will know us from the work that we do within this sector because we're typically the technology used within universities for students and academics, but we also operate within organisations from an EX and CX perspective, and we're obviously focusing our thinking on this session in the EX space today. And in the past few years, universities have come to us really looking to innovate and expand and improve upon their approach. And that's something that we're going to really dig into. Why is the approaches that are being taken today, why are they not necessarily working? How do you drive greater action on experience data? So in this webinar, there's really three topics that we want to go through with you. We're going to talk about how you can craft an employee listening program that will really finely tune to the unique challenges that higher education organisations are facing today. We're going to look at how you can garner both buy-in from leadership and frontline employees. And we're also going to give you a bit of an insight into how we're using AI both ethically and effectively to elevate the programmes that we're running and taking them to new heights. So why are we running this session, and why are we hearing so many universities come to us saying that they really do want to innovate and improve on their employee experience approach? Well, it's because we're seeing a huge disruption within this sector in many of the sectors we operate, but particularly within the higher education sector. It's been a really challenging time with COVID and the shift in learning approaches, changing the whole nature of how education is delivered, with challenges in finances, with strike action, etc. Like many sectors, while engagement is not necessarily changing, the psychological contract between employer and employee really is shifting, and we're seeing that represented in a breakdown of trust and in themes around some of the other issues that you would expect to see in environments like this. When we did some research recently into this sector, there were a number of themes that were highlighted in terms of key trends. We see that experience is absolutely fundamental to the organisations in which in this sector, whether it's about students stepping foot on campuses for the first time or educators deciding whether to stay or leave within the sector. We're seeing experiences becoming extremely important. And our research showed that there are 4 key trends when it comes to driving those experiences. Firstly, aligning satisfaction with pay and performance is extremely important and becoming increasingly important within the current economic environment. We're seeing an interesting dynamic between employers and employees on the topic of risk and innovation. We're seeing employees really wanting to be working in environments that provide them with opportunities for growth, but also avoid burnout. And we're seeing building trust and acting on feedback as a fundamental thing that's connected with engagement. And that's one of the things that we're going to be really focusing in on today. How can you create a listening approach which helps build that trust and helps drive action across these themes and many others? So before I hand over to Peter, who's going to take you through some of the key themes on this topic, I just wanted to share a little bit more data just to show the strength of the issues that we're facing. In our research, we've seen that 1 in 3 employees within this sector is experiencing burnout, and 67% say that their workloads are unmanageable. And we're also seeing interesting shifts in terms of likelihood to stay. So 2 in 3 employees saying that they plan to leave the sector within 5 years. So, a really burning platform to start thinking differently about how you engage with employees and about how you understand and act on the issues that they're experiencing. We're going to talk very specifically in this session about how you can improve your employee engagement approach, but also more broadly your employee experience approach. And I just wanted to briefly define employee experience in terms of the way we think about it. So we think about employee experience as something that isn't just about an annual engagement survey, but that is about creating over time a holistic listening approach, which allows you to tap into the issues that impact employees on an ongoing basis, whether that's from the day they join an organisation to the moment they leave, or all of the different moments that matter in between, whether that's for individuals or for groups of employees. Holistic employee listening essentially helps you to tap in on these issues and to drive a very different type of change to a more traditional approach. But even with those traditional approaches, we think there's huge opportunity to innovate, and that's something that we're going to really focus on in this session today. So without further ado, Peter, I would love it if you could take over and just take the group through a bit more detail in terms of our thinking on the themes that are impacting people experience. And then Therese will bring to light some of the approaches that we take through the technology that we offer in partnership with FeedbackWorks.
Super. Okay, thank you for that, Sally. So as Sally just mentioned, we know that there are a series of fundamental problems in the UK higher education sector. We have people who are leaving, we have people en masse who are suffering from burnout. And although the kind of standard engagement score has remained relatively static over the last few years, it feels like the social contract has been broken. So as we can see here in this slide, we've still got the situation where people want to be listened to. It's a genuine desire that people have, but that they don't feel that institutions are actually acting on what they're saying, right? So this is created what we call really a wasted opportunity, and a subsequent breakdown actually in terms of trust between staff and leaders. So one of the trends that we're seeing in our listening industry is that higher education institutions are moving beyond just focusing on the employee engagement score to looking at how we can measure culture and how we can rebuild that trust. Sally mentioned the Qualtrics 2024, the research that's just come out, which should be available to you all. That research concludes that 2024 is the year of trust, and I think nowhere is that more important, more relevant than in higher education. So how do we go on about rebuilding trust and building a sustainable culture of trust? I think merely just saying that you've got a strategy around it won't go very far. Just strategizing and saying for the senior leadership to say, oh yeah, we're going to put these things into place to rebuild trust and everything's going to be fine, just isn't good enough. You need to start changing the culture at a cultural level towards one where people can start trusting each other, and your listening strategy is a huge part of that. And that's because you need to take your people along with you in the decision-making process, or else the whole journey that you're on is doomed to fail. In terms of what we've tended to see in the past within higher education organisations, there are five key things that we've seen go wrong in those approaches of how things used to be done, and you may indeed recognise some of these from previous places that you worked. But often we find that to start with, the entire listening strategy has not been defined and is not aligned to the objectives of the institution, so it's uncoupled. We also find that the wrong questions are asked, or rather that those questions that are asked don't actually get the insight out that help you meet the objectives that you should have defined. So it's undesigned. In terms of being unhearing, we often find that the technology is poor and doesn't enable you to ask the questions and talk and do the kind of research that you want to be able to do. But also we find that the technology is often not kind of participation inclusive, so that not everyone who should be able to take part can take part. So that's the unhearing part. Another problem that we often see is that the outputs that people receive are not actionable. Here's your results, here's some numbers, but that's not insightful. And then finally, for this to be moved towards more of a process, a culture of feedback, rather than just let's do a survey. We need to evolve the process so that managers feel that they're able to develop their listening skills and their feedback skills to create that culture of feedback. And these are the kind of problems that mean that when customers come and speak to us, they'll say, look, I've got 1 or 2 or 3 or indeed all of these problems with my current listening program. What can we do to improve it? So I've got some simple ways to address each of those flaws that we just mentioned from the more traditional approach. And we've got the 5-step value method. It's pretty simple, but it's quite sticky. People seem to like it. So there's kind of like some takeaways today, really, to think about how to overcome some of those problems. So right from the get-go, it's about setting the vision and understanding the strategy of what you're trying to do, what you're actually trying to achieve here. The architecture in terms of building the actual program out, how often we should run a survey, at which moments matter, and even kind of which questions we should ask. And the answer to how you define those is to tie it back to the vision piece. And listening, making sure it's inclusive and that everyone feels heard. That's the actual listening process. Then understanding, so when you see results or your dashboards or whatever it is that you might receive, that managers are empowered with the correct insights that they need and that they can understand them. And then finally, evolving your listening program to really give managers the kind of capabilities to not just get us take an action from a survey, but to actually embed feedback and open listening and open communication as kind of business as usual. So any listening program is doomed to failure unless you actually agree initially, internally, on why you're actually doing all of this stuff. So what are you actually trying to achieve here, and how does it tie in with the objectives of the institution? One of the things that people don't do, that you need to do, is to be honest about where you are in terms of maturity. You can understand where you want to get to. You might want to have a whole series of listening signposts and have great training and development, but where are you at the moment? Don't bite off more than you can chew. It's definitely very much a journey. Another thing to set at this vision stage is to understand your stakeholders, know who they are. You're going to have a lot of design decisions to make here. What questions, who we're going to ask, what we're going to do from the results. And front of mind, you need throughout all of that, who are going to be the stakeholders, who are you delivering to? One thing we find really useful at this stage is to develop a statement, a kind of framework around your listening, that all the decisions and everything you do can kind of be tied back to. So, for example, you can have something like that we're going to create a great process that helps everyone be heard, leads to real improvements, and helps to rebuild trust, something like that. So I did a vision workshop for a whole day last week with a client, and it was really interesting because what we came out with in terms of what they wanted to do for their listening program was completely different from what they actually went into that room thinking that they were going to do as part of the listening program. So the importance of getting everything planned up right at the start is really important. We'll come and see some of this stuff brought to life in demo form in a little bit, but I just thought I'd go through each stage. So once you've actually worked out why you're doing something, we kind of move on to the how you do it and the actual planning and the building of the project. So here's the architecture. This building stage is when we start to think about things like the cadence, themes, topics and questions and that sort of thing. And there are three things that you can do at this stage that you have to do to make this successful. The first is that it's essential to have the right technology. You're going to come out of your previous vision planning workshops and thinking, right, I want to do this, this, and this. You have to make sure that the technology that you use is agile enough to enable you to do everything that you want to do, that like no compromises. Secondly, I think for this to be successful, it has to be bespoke to you. So each higher education institution is culturally different from the next, even though it's within the same sector. Each institution will have its own vision and values and norms and expected behaviours and culture. And rather than just have something that's off the shelf, your listening strategy and your listening program has to be something that's bespoke to you. And then the final thing on how you build this stuff is to be mindful of the future. Remember, this is a journey. What you should be doing is planning a 2 or 3 or 5 year listening strategy. And what you want in the future will inevitably change. It could be that something unforeseen happens and you need to change what you do. And you just need to make sure that the technology is agile enough to enable you to make that change. Next slide, please. Right. So this should be the easy bit. Yeah, you launch a survey. That's interesting. Press a button, everything launches. But there are still some bits here that people often get wrong, that there are some small things you can do to improve. I think the first one really, particularly in higher ed institutions, is to think about inclusion, for it to be at the core of everything you do. We're about to see a demonstration of what this looks like, but you do need to be mindful of things like languages, accessibility, compatible devices, text readers, those sort of things. We want to make sure that everyone gets the chance to participate, and that's absolutely imperative. And that helps, again, reinforce trust. The one thing that every organisation and institution wants to do is increase participation rates. And there's kind of 4 key things, key ways of doing that, which people don't often do. And the first is when you're addressing the pre-survey communication, right? So before any surveys go out or any listening program gets launched, think about making a fantastic pre-survey communication marketing plan, not just a will this do, or this is the paragraph we used last year, or an email from some leader or whatever it might be, but treat it as you would treat a marketing campaign, right? So a real best-in-class set of pre-survey communications to explain what you're doing and why. Secondly, is make the surveys as short as possible. As I mentioned, part of the kind of design, vision and architecture of this process, we need to make sure that you're only asking questions that you're actually going to need the answers to. Now, that might sound trite, but so many times in those kind of sessions, I'll sit and say, why are you asking that question? What are you going to do with the results? How does it feed into your objectives? And it's good to push back and reduce the amount of questions you have. Thirdly, is to be open and honest about confidentiality. So if you're in an organisation where trust really is an issue, it's already broken down or it's on the verge of breaking down, one of the things that stops people taking part is the feeling that their answers are going to be read, or that it's not anonymous or confidential, whatever it might be. Now, however you want to set your confidentiality thresholds, it's key to communicate again and again what they are, how data will be treated, and that the whole thing is entirely confidential. Right? Double down on that, which people don't often do. And then finally, and most importantly, and we'll come to talk about this in a moment, is you have to take action off the back of the survey. But we'll come on to talk about that in a moment. I think Therese is now going to show some of the listening stuff in a little demo.
Yes. So what I want to do here is actually share some examples of where we've seen other institutions maximize their inclusivity as part of the listening strategy. So I think as a very first principle, it goes without saying that it should be as accessible for everyone who needs to take part. They should be able to access this. And obviously, email has always been a very traditional way to get surveys to staff. We've seen a lot of success with institutions actually pushing surveys and invites through the likes of Microsoft Teams or through Slack as well. So we have the kind of integrations there to enable that. But also think about mobile accessibility. So, I mean, it goes without saying this is always going to be important. I think about 50% of staff take a listening survey as part of their commute or when they're on the go. And this is dependent on, whether it's kind of SMS or email. But I think one of the biggest questions we'll always get asked is actually, what about those staff who don't have regular access to email or to desktop devices? And it's really important to be inclusive here as well. So this is typically where we might use things like QR codes on posters or flyers or communications. So they simply scan this with a phone, or we can use things like kiosk surveys dotted across the institution as well. But I guess this is just the very first element, is kind of the basic principle, is just ensuring accessibility. So now let me just have to shift my screen a little bit because Zoom is in the way. But the second point is, of course, ensuring that this is something that's very much personalized to you as an institution as well. So what we mean by this is we know in some cases vendors can be very insistent on a very specific framework. So this is in terms of the kind of questions that are asked. It's in terms of the kind of framework that's used, the methodology, but also in terms of how we listen to staff as well. So it's not really reflective of your vision. It's not really reflective of the key moments that matter for your employees. And of course, that further breaks down that trust and that engagement from employees as well. So to overcome this, a big part of our approach is working with you to build out those touch points and strategies that make most sense. So for example, we know a very big topic for a lot of institutions today is in around burnout and well-being. And they want to institutions are looking to do more frequent listening, so checking in more frequently with staff to prevent burnout. And as an example, what we did is with Cornell University, they were running very frequent pulsing with their staff. And they did this to be able to check in on issues around DEI specifically. So they identified some issues and they wanted to put in place an early warning system to prevent those from escalating. Now, one key challenge here is we don't want to over survey staff. So we do things like randomly sample different groups of employees over a 12-week period, for example, or we'll target a very specific group of employees as part of more frequent listening. But again, it's all around being able to easily identify some of those critical issues before they escalate. And as a result of the webinar today, we will share with you a video from Cornell, so you can hear in their own voice some of the questions they asked as part of that. So what kind of methodology they used, but also the kind of outcomes that they saw as a result as well. I think it's a very helpful video to really see that come to life. But the second area around inclusivity is actually we see a lot of organizations looking to increase belonging or inclusivity by listening at the right kind of moments as well. So particularly as employees go through critical milestones. So if you think about someone onboarding within an institution, if you think about someone transitioning to a new role, or maybe returning from caregiver leave, this is where we want to ensure that we're providing the right kind of supports and opportunities for those individuals to be successful, regardless of their background. So this is where we'll talk about things like life cycle surveys. And this could be anything from, I suppose, listening across the candidate or hiring process through to onboarding or even things like exit surveys as well. Now, we can, of course, help you with providing you the right kind of questions to ask and how to tie this in with your overall listening strategy. But we also can enable this from a technical perspective. So linking with your HR system to trigger listening at the right points. So for example, in this case, we can trigger a survey to be sent automatically to staff 7 days of them returning from caregiver leave. And this, of course, when we do it in context, it allows us to get very insightful feedback, but it shows that we're listening and that we're caring about our employees as they transition to new roles and milestones as well. But the third point I want to make about inclusivity is actually not just how we're capturing that data, but how we're using that data as well. And specifically, when we use things like reports or dashboards, we need to be able to break this out across different demographics. So we can see the experiences of different employee groups. And we should be able to do this in a way that's quite agile as well. So breaking down across, let's say, gender, age, different disability status, etc. But one thing we're seeing being more and more important for institutions is actually this idea of intersectional identities or intersectionality. So this is where, for example, if I'm a caregiver, this might vary depending on whether I'm male or female, or how I identify from a gender perspective, or if I'm someone with a disability, maybe this might interact with my ethnic or racial background. So it's important to be able to view data from this perspective, or to really interrogate and drill down across different intersections to really understand the experience of different identities and different groups across your organization as well. Now, we will return a lot to look at this reporting and how we can make the best use of this. Before we go into the technical perspective, I believe Peter has a few words to say on how we can support you in understanding insights as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was really brilliant. The way that the senior leaders and HR people can just drill down is great. But the other kind of output from this kind of process is, of course, results going to managers, to line managers and local leaders. So a key stage is ensuring that whether it's dashboards or reports, whatever types of results and insights that are put in front of managers, that they're easy to understand and act on. This is one of the problems where I've seen this done poorly before, but it's absolutely essential to get this right. And there's two key elements to success here. There's the tech, and then there's the skills of the manager. So as we'll see in a moment, with some of the great tech you're about to see, we can ensure that we get the right information in front of the right people at the right time, and kind of 80% of the journey is there. That the tech is now at a stage where it can provide managers with pretty much everything they need. But it's also important that managers have the skills and the ability to understand what's placed in front of them, right? So this kind of idea of managers as stakeholders is often overlooked. When I talked earlier about the vision element of thinking about all of your stakeholders, thinking of your managers and what they'll receive as stakeholders is really important. So one way that we've that's worked really well in the past is for us to run manager enablement webinars so that people are prepared for the format and the content of what they're going to receive, and that they're comfortable understanding their results.
Fantastic. So I think with that, obviously, a lot of what kind of Peter is mentioning there is obviously the importance of providing the right kind of support and coaching. But the technology is going to have a part to play in this as well. So I suppose one thing when we think about how we provide insights to our managers and to our leaders, of course, these should be personalized based on their role. But as a design principle, we should make it very clear for them where to take action. And we should do this in a way that's kind of very easy to access within the first few moments of viewing their data. Obviously, we know managers, they're very time poor. They certainly don't have time to be analyzing data, making sense of it, and then come up with actions without any guidance. So a few things, I suppose, purely from a design perspective, as a manager, let's say, views their data, if I was to view our overall kind of outcomes and values that we care about as an institution, I can see how well I'm performing, and I can see the context of this as well. So as a manager, I can see that I'm actually performing very well in terms of well-being. And I know this because I'm benchmarking really well in comparison to external benchmarks and potentially other internal benchmarks as well. But more than this, rather than just highlighting how we're doing, it's also to highlight where to take action and to give confidence to managers that they're taking action in the right areas as well. So highlighting to them where they're doing well, but also where they have opportunities to improve. And what we mean by this is, as a manager, it's not really just that I'm have really high scores when it comes to role modeling certain values, or that I'm performing badly, but actually I should be aware of the impact that this has on some of the key outcomes and values that we care about as an institution. In other words, I have the confidence that if I'm going to look into certain areas, if I'm going to prioritize certain areas, that they're actually going to lead to the outcomes, they're going to lead to real change on my team as well. But beyond this, to provide even more assistance to help managers to get to insights faster, Qualtrics has actually built a lot of AI into the platform. In the first case, we can see we have our inbuilt manager assistant or chatbot. So this is like an inbuilt coach for managers. For example, as a manager, if I want to query my data, maybe I want to understand what actions I need to take in order to improve well-being on my team, we can see that the AI will actually generate a summary and generate some helpful tips on how I can do this. Obviously, this is personalized to me as a manager as well. Now, of course, this is what it's doing is it's summarizing some of the data that we have here in front of us, but also it's leveraging all of this very rich benchmark data, all this trends and kind of best practice that Qualtrics has been capturing for more than 1 decade, maybe 2 decades at this point when it comes to employee experience across different sectors as well. So again, just helping managers to have confidence they're taking action in the right areas. But the second element we'll often get into conversations about is actually around text analytics. So traditionally, this is where we're getting kind of open text feedback in surveys. It can be really difficult for leaders and managers to make sense of this. And it takes usually a lot of analyst time to help managers get there as well. So this is where we can leverage AI using things like natural language processing. Qualtrics can surface key topics and trends in the open text feedback. But also we can see how they correlate with things like sentiment or emotion analysis as well. So if as a leader, for example, I wanted to understand the experience of very new hires in my organization, I can see certain topics such as leadership and resources are coming up a lot. In particular, resources is coming up in a very negative light when it comes to sentiment. And actually, as we drill down here, we see it's related to staffing and IT systems and related to topics such as related to emotions such as confusions and frustration. So really highlighting the urgency to act here as well. Now, really important to still be able to read the open text comments. This obviously gives us the voice of our staff themselves. But actually, now we have a lot more context as to the overall importance and for which groups of employees certain topics are important as well. But another kind of element that we'll often get into here is, a lot of departments, a lot of teams are quite small. So you might have maybe 7 or 8 employees on your team as a manager. And we want to be able to protect the anonymity of those staff as well. So we'd often recommend, for open text feedback that you're not really able to drill down past 10 employees, because potentially if I'm a manager, I can identify certain writing styles, or I can identify kind of different ways employees express themselves. And at the same time, if, by not being able to see this data, I'm missing out on a lot of very valuable piece of data from our teams as well. So what Qualtrics can now do with the AI is actually provide what we call confidential comment summaries. So for those managers who have small teams, we can actually see and generate a summary around, let's say, positive feedback that are coming up around certain key topics or trends, team suggestions, etc. So it's enabling us to hear that employee voice, but actually doing that in a way that's still protecting the anonymity of our team members as well. So just a couple of ways that we can really take that burden off our frontline staff and enable them to get to action and get to insight much faster. So with that, I think one of the final points we want to touch on here is actually how we can build this out over time. So where we can evolve to. And this is where Peter can share some insights here as well.
Thank you. That's great. It's always really interesting to see the AI in the reporting. But the final stage of the process, which can always be improved, is the action planning stage. So in the traditional approaches, which we talked about right at the start, that's very top down, right? So managers were kind of assigned a set of actions and they were just expected to get on with it. You've probably seen examples in your own career, I know I have, where that's happened and it just doesn't work, right? It's not sustainable, and it just doesn't happen at all. There are 2 things you can do to fix these problems at the action planning stage. Firstly, is utilizing everything that the tech has to offer. We're about to see this in a demo of what this looks like in reality. But what you need to do is to ensure that you get all of your people involved, both in proposing ideas for change. So, you identify there's an issue, so get everyone to crowdsource and think about what we can do to improve that rather than it being top down. But also agreeing on those actions, right? So proposing, but both proposing and agreeing on what the actions that taken should be. And we'll see an example of that in a moment. The second, though, is to really think about manager capability. So not all managers are great leaders. Not all managers have great skills when it comes to listening, providing feedback. And what you want to do is have a workforce where all managers are great at that. And and just to ensure that all managers and leaders have the capability to have open conversations and really become great with feedback. So it's a kind of business as usual piece. And this is a real skill, and not everyone will get it overnight. And quite often there's some kind of enablement that needs to happen to get people to that place, but that's exactly what you want. I think getting those two things right, the tech and the manager capabilities, will over time create a culture of feedback, where everyone can have open and honest conversations with each other. And that's really the way to rebuild trust in an organization.
Perfect. So I can bring some of this to light as well. So I think one of the key points that Peter has brought up is obviously this needs to be a more collaborative approach to action planning, and this comes back to something we brought up very early in the webinar, which is around I suppose people not feeling that any action is going to be taken as a result of their feedback as well. So that really undermines trust and overall engagement in kind of the listening program as well. Now, just to highlight, Qualtrics has things like action planning and guided action planning as part of our solution. That means that managers can come in or leaders can come in and add their own targeted actions. They can even leverage suggested or guided actions based on best practice, either built by Qualtrics or by yourselves as an institution as well. But before we get to this stage, we might be missing out on an opportunity to really engage our teams in this as well. And this is where we're talking a little bit more about what we call this kind of ideation phase. As a manager, as I look to take action, the first step should be discussing this with my team. And from here, when we've decided what points we want to act on, we also have the possibility to use things like idea boards. And idea boards here allow us to brainstorm with our team on what kind of actions they would like to see in place as a result of the feedback as well. Now, we allow team members to do this anonymously. In other words, they can anonymously provide suggestions on certain actions or upvote the suggestions from colleagues as well. The reason this is anonymous is sometimes there might be topics like recognition or pay or reward that they don't feel comfortable maybe talking about in a team environment or directly with their manager. So again, this kind of anonymous feedback allows us to still capture that voice. So the impact here is two things really. So on the one hand, it ensures the manager is confident that they're taking action in the areas that are most important for the team. And on the other hand, we're still being very collaborative and giving our team that voice in how they want their feedback used as well. Now, one final point I want to make in terms of kind of evolving your program and building that culture of action is actually thinking about what happens next. So we know there are a number of organizations on the webinar today. They might be earlier on in this journey, so maybe just looking at nailing their employee listening. As Peter mentioned earlier, you certainly don't want to take on too much too early. But at the same time, we've had a lot of conversations about organizations wanting to take this to the next level as well. So with this in mind, I think a couple of best practices to share here. So if you are looking to go beyond, let's just say, your annual listening, maybe you want to look at things like candidate experience or life cycle moments. One thing we'd highlight is it's very important to be able to bring all of this together in one space. And so what we mean here is for your CHRO, for your Chief People Officer, they have all of this at their fingertips. But actually, we're working a lot more with teams who actually want to connect the dots even closer. So actually understanding, okay, across, let's say, our life cycle moments, such as onboarding, how is this going to impact later intent to stay or later engagement as measured by our annual listening survey? So this is essentially where we're mapping data together to help us to be a lot more predictive and understand, I suppose, how we can put in interventions early to prevent things from escalating. So, for example, looking at onboarding feedback, we can see the impact of onboarding on let's say, later intent to stay, specifically the outcomes that we should look to change and put in those early interventions, or what kind of trends and themes are coming up in open text data for onboarding that are going to impact later kind of intent to stay here as well. So just an example of some ways that we can help you connect your program over time. But just as I wrap up, I think one of the key things we did want to get across today is when it comes to building trust, it's also being able to work with a partner that's willing to adapt to your requirements as an institution and not the other way around. So whether you're at the very start of that journey or looking to evolve, I think it's very important and that you have that trust and you with your partner as well, and that you're able to, I suppose, build this around the things that are most important for your institution. So with that, I'll let Peter give some key takeaways before we move on to the Q&A.
I think that's really good. Thank you for that, Therese. Yeah, so just to kind of draw together everything we've said throughout the session, 5 takeaways of things we moved from traditional approach to better ways of listening. The first is to create a compelling strategy, a compelling vision around what you actually want to achieve. Honestly, so few organizations do this step, and it's really important. It's the kind of why stage which people often skip. Secondly is, and we've just seen some brilliant examples of looking at different moments that matter. So designing and building an integrated program that's going to get you the information that you need to provide the insights to the people that you need to, right? So thinking about the stakeholders. The inclusion element's really so important, and it runs through it like a stick of rock, both in terms of ensuring that people can take part, so using great tech to be able to do that, but also in enabling everyone to be involved in the decision making, right? If you're not currently doing that, that's something you absolutely need to do. So enable understanding, which is ensuring that managers and leaders can understand the insights that they receive. So having that great kind of tech examples where you've got simple ways of digesting information. And then finally, think about the capabilities of your managers. If you want to create a culture of trust, then your managers are the key element of that, and they have to be able to have open and honest, great feedback sessions and build a culture of feedback, and then getting them to do that will build that culture of trust.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. I think that was a super interesting walkthrough of some of the latest approaches and key thinking around how organisations can improve their approaches. So thank you so much. I hope the audience found that interesting. I'm just looking at the questions here, and we have a couple. We've got a couple of minutes, so I thought we'd just take a couple of questions. The first one is around the topic of survey fatigue. Any guidance and advice on how you prevent survey fatigue?
Yeah, okay. So survey fatigue is an interesting one because it's something that used to be mentioned quite a lot, but isn't mentioned quite so much anymore. I think that kind of generation Y and Z are so used to taking surveys and filling in TripAdvisor things and so on that it's less of an issue than I think it used to be. There are ways, of course, of getting around survey fatigue within a listening program. So there are, the tech enables you to sample certain groups of people within an organization so that people are surveyed less frequently. And also, what I said about keeping surveys short, only asking things that you really need to know the answer to. So short, less frequent, but don't be as concerned about it as you might have been in the past.
One around touch points. So we've talked a little bit about the different touch points that make up a holistic listening program. If someone wanted to start somewhere, what would be the typical? I've picked one that probably can't be answered in a minute, but what would be the typical touch point that you would start with beyond a kind of annual engagement survey?
I think the most common ones are new joiner and exit. Right, that's the ones that we tend to see. But this all goes back to the vision and strategy that you want to include. So the answer is it's going to be completely bespoke to your organization. It might be that, retention's a huge issue. So you really focus on regretted leavers and then putting interventions in, or whatever it might be. So there's no typical one, but those are the 2 most common.
Yeah, and starting with what's the pain point, what's the problem that you're trying to fix, right? And targeting that one is always really helpful. Okay, and a final very practical question, opinion view on industry benchmarks. Therese, do you want to answer that in terms of how are benchmarks something that we can include, how important are benchmarks, etc.?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think this is always a big question for higher ed institutions we work with. We provide higher ed benchmarks and nonprofit benchmarks as well. And we can do this in a quite granular way. So across kind of individual metrics. We've quite a big library of those, but we also work with you to kind of map some of the key values or key outcomes that you're looking to measure back to some of the benchmarks that are available here as well. Not something that's ever growing, but I suppose the short answer to that is yes, we have higher ed benchmarks.
Great. Okay, well, we're up on time, so thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Therese. Really interesting and useful content, I think, that you've shared today. We will be sending out the content for this webinar and also some thought leadership and the Cornell example as well in the follow-up for this. But obviously, you can reach out to us and ask us any questions when we do that follow-up, or otherwise, just reach out to us to say hi and ask questions whenever you like to. Okay, so thank you so much, guys. Thank you for joining us, and have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.